Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me for an episode of the Hold On to Your Heart Project podcast. My name is Jackie, and I'm the host. Tonight, I'll be interviewing Richard, who is a longtime community counselor. He has 42 years in the recovery space. Listen in as he shares his experience, strength, and hope. Richard.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming on to the Hold On to Your Heart Project
My
podcast.
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's an honor to be sitting with you. I've done a short kind of introduction to our conversation here today, but do you want to start by just sharing a few things about yourself and what brings you here today?
What brings me here today is I've seen your podcasts, and I've enjoyed them. And tell me a little about yourself. That's hard to do. First of all, I'm old. I was born in 1942, so that makes me old. I'll be 82 in about a month and a half in August. So, yeah, I was born during World War II in Chicago, Illinois, and of German parents, German grandparents. Both grandparents on my paternal and maternal side had immigrated from the old country, Germany, and the United States was at war, in the middle of a war with Germany, and we were in Chicago in an ethnic neighborhood, and I was a little boy playing with the kids on the sidewalk outside the house speaking German, and the United States was at war with Germany. So what happened inside the house is the parents and grandparents saw this, immediately freaked out that I was using some German and English. And so they stopped speaking German and just spoke English. So when I walk into the room, they'd be in the middle of a conversation, this was as a child, and then they would stop and switch to English. And then they would see whether or not I was listening or not, or whether I understood what they were saying. And what happened for that little boy that would walk in the room is he felt like he didn't belong in that family. And I grew up with that. And so I think not belonging was put into me a long time before. And I think that contributed to my choosing alcohol because I didn't feel I belonged. And it was something when I drank that I would, it was like, there was a connection. There was a connection to the alcohol. And that was what I connected to. And
when did you find yourself kind of drinking? Like,
well, I had my first alcoholic beverage at 5. And I remember I had my first cigarette at 5.
Who was giving you alcohol and cigarettes at 5?
Well, there were house parties, and both my parents were alcoholics. I should have said that. They both died from drinking when I was in my teen years. And so what would happen is they'd have house parties, of course, lots of drinking, and I, as a little boy, would go and clean up the glasses. And then what I would do is I'd go into the pantry where nobody would see me, and I'd take these empty glasses that were full of scotch and whiskey and vodka and you name it, pour it all into one glass, and then I would chug it while I was in the pantry as 5 years old.
Do you remember liking alcohol in that moment? Like, you
Absolutely.
were chugging it, so I imagine you loved it. Yes.
Well, I went out and danced in my underwear to the visitors of the party. And everybody laughed, and I loved it because people were paying attention. And when they're paying attention, oh man, that was the greatest, right? And actually, I was second born. My sister was the golden child. I was the scapegoat. I was the one that got the attention from acting up, getting arrested, etc. You know, stealing cars, things like that.
Was there another one born after yourself?
Nope.
Just you and your sister?
That was it. And my sister was 5 years older than I, are born in 1937. So it's kind of hard to describe what was going on in 1937 or 1942 to somebody in 2024. However, something that might let people know is gasoline was 19 cents a gallon.
There you go.
It cost 10 cents to go to the movies on Saturday, which my mother would always give me a quarter because then I could buy popcorn and get into the movies, and she could get rid of me. And
Have a house party.
Yeah, so anyway, I grew up basically with alcohol, very close to me, in my families, and very professional family. Lots of doctors, dentists, lawyers, executives with TRW, things like that would be part of the family get-togethers. So there was lots of criticism if I wasn't on this success path that they all were. So I basically grew up not fitting in there, not able to keep up to my sister, who was the golden child. And she was a golden child and still is. And so I proceeded to drink, drug, deal at a time when that really wasn't like it is now. So I was ahead of the curve.
It already sounds like, yeah, like a jam-packed full of, quite the experience. And I guess when it relates to holding on to your heart, when you think of holding on to your heart in respect to some of the stuff that you've been through, what do you think of? I hear you say like not belonging and feeling behind. Like when you think of holding on to your heart, what comes to mind for you?
I understand. And I didn't even know I had a heart. I didn't know to hang on to it. I didn't even know what I was doing. Because any kind of acceptance or anything that I was involved in had to do with exterior, that if I had achieved something, then I would belong. Because that was the model that was given to me with all these medical doctor degrees and DDSs, and they all had achieved. And so I saw that's how you belong, is you achieve, you get a title. And that's what was modeled to me. And so I just went right along with it. And
is there a time in particular where you really did have to hold on to your heart? Or I guess, is there a time in particular, in opposite, I guess, where you really so felt like you didn't have a heart and you so didn't belong? Like, is there a certain scenario?
No. As a matter of fact, that's perhaps a little bit of how it was. And what happened in terms of Richard's leaving alcohol behind was I got crushed. Alcohol and that lifestyle just crushed me. And I was a holdout.
What does it look like to be completely crushed by alcohol? Can you paint a picture or elaborate?
Yes. When you have all your belongings in a garbage bag, and you've come at birth from tons of money, buckets of money that you never had to worry about. So you never had to worry about money. And so that's how I look back in my recovery. That's what my dad did. He was a workaholic. He worked 9 to 9, 6 days a week. And also took care of everything else. So that's what he did. But it wasn't with me. And so if I had just achieved enough, then I would get that love. Then I would belong. And so when I talk about being crushed, And this has gone on for quite a while. Like an example would be, is I had a driver, I was currently in Northern California. I had a Texas expired driver's license. I had Utah license plates. I had no insurance, and I had no money to put gas into this 1972 pea soup green car. You know,
You had it all.
and so I struggled and struggled and struggled and struggled, and I was digging in the furniture for change to buy booze, to do whatever. But I didn't have any money, and I didn't have money for food, and I didn't have a job, and I didn't have any way to get there. And I remember sitting in a park with my garbage bag, watching a family with little children that were also homeless, and just like broke my heart when I saw these kids and the responsibility of that. And so anyway, to make a long story short, I got crushed, and I don't think I found God or the Creator, or whatever we're going to call a power greater than myself. I believe that that entity found me, because I was walking across the floor in this cabin in North Lake Shore, Tahoe, in this total hopeless place, and I couldn't take one more step forward. I was totally beat. Totally beat. And there was a ray of sunshine coming through the window, and I was freezing cold, and it wasn't cold, you know. And I just went. I got dropped, and the sun came through, and I said, "Please help me." I didn't know who I was talking to. Please help me. And I still come from this place that you don't have to get totally crushed in order to find recovery, but it sure helps. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden I got warm, and I got a message. And the message was, go to AA. This is about 5 o'clock in an afternoon. I can't even tell you. And I've been suicidal a couple of times. And I was drinking every day. But it wasn't working. And everything was to hell in a handbasket. And I got up, and I went to the telephone book. This is after sobbing for quite a while, and I hadn't cried before. And I saw AA. I got some message. I can't tell you what the words were, but something said, go to AA. That was at 5 o'clock. And so the meeting was at 7. So I saw the address that was in the phone book. And it turns out, this is kind of wild, the liquor store that I got my brandy and my Kahlua and all of it was in the same address. I went, holy shit, you know. So that can't be right. But I did go there, and it turns out that if I walked straight forward into this little mall, I'd be in the liquor store. But if I stopped before I went in the door and just walked up the stairs, I was at an AA meeting. So the AA meeting was above Spirit Liquors. And I went in there, and that was the beginning. And I cried and cried and cried in the meeting.
What year was that, Richard?
Oh, God. Well, I'll be 42 years sober, so. And I'm grateful, you know, that I have two grandchildren that don't have the experience of having alcohol in the home. Mm-hmm. My daughter doesn't drink or drug, neither does my son-in-law. And so they're in a basically addiction-proof home, so the kids don't have any clue of that, and you can watch it. And Grandpa doesn't drink,
What a nice.
and so they. That's one thing I'm grateful to God when I'm saying my gratitude is that my grandchildren, and for that matter my children, really didn't see me drinking, you know, and don't have the experience that I had of growing up, where something is more important than you are. And to my experience was alcohol was more important to my father and my parents than I was. And everything was still, my sister was getting all the accolades because she was graduating #1 in the class and quill and scroll and all the accomplishments that academic success brings you. And I graduated 400th out of 404 in the graduating class. Oh, I know. And I graduated in summer school. When I walked across the stage to get my diploma, it was blank because I hadn't graduated. I had to go to summer school to get the credits because I had missed so much school. And so I did.
You didn't feel like you belonged in school either.
Oh, thank you. That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And so when I was working in alcohol and drug, we had a youth program, and part of the program was a sort of like a wagon wheel. And one of the things that all youth need is to feel that they belong. And I gravitated to that I never felt that. I never felt that. And so that was, again, AA gave me that. I also didn't know how to live. And AA gave me a recipe for life, is what I call the steps. And people would welcome me when I would come in the room. I'd be happy to see them. I would feel that I had an hour or more of support time when I went to meetings, and just day at a time. And if I was going to tell anybody about recovery, well, I am doing it right now, but if I'm going to tell somebody about it, you better get down one day at a time. Because as soon as you start thinking, well, I'm not going to drink this week, or I'm not going to drink for a couple of days, forget it. You can drink tomorrow, but today I committed to, I'm not going to drink today. Whew, hanging on.
That's such a good takeaway, yeah, to keep it one day at a time. And
Absolutely, one day at a time. And the other thing is, I didn't struggle with this, but when I've suggested to people that they go to AA, they say, oh, I can't handle a God thing. Well, you can't handle a God thing. You know, if you can't handle a God thing, you're effed. You know, because if you don't have something greater than yourself to support you, to carry you, you know, God worked me through AA, through NA, through all the different recovery programs.
12-step groups and
All 12-step
Yeah.
groups. And they also, so if I was, and I'm doing it again, but the important thing, I believe, is to connect with yourself and your inner child, what you went through. Because when I've been critical of myself in the past, it hasn't been my inner critic and all my voices about how could I do this and whatever. It was to the alcoholic. It was to the adult. And what I'm saying is that most of the criticism works at my little child, and that's who I needed to rescue. So that's what I did. And I went to adult children of alcoholics. I went to sex and relationship 12-step groups.
well-versed.
Overeaters Anonymous 12-step groups, because I ate myself right into padding. That way, if I was fat, I couldn't get hurt. And also a lot of the nervousness, I had learned as a child, because what one therapist told me was that I was a moving target is harder to hit. And so as long as I was on the move, my mother couldn't catch me to hit me, you know. And I had lots of that. So, however, I was in a men's group back in 95, 96 with some really good men up in a living room in Kimberly. And it dawned on me that I wouldn't have had all of that to share or been the person that I was in that group or here today if those things had never happened to me. And so as painful as they were, I can identify with yourself and other people in the program, other people that come to me for counseling, and they talk about their pain. I can identify with that because I was there. And I can also identify with the beauty and the connection to a higher power. And I never had a struggle with that, although I was raised very in a very, very religious upbringing, background. My father donated lots of money to the church, and I lived as a youth in church. I'd go to vacation Bible school or confirmation or whatever it was, and my parents used God as a weapon, and so it was more like spiritual abuse. And the spiritual abuse is that I believed that God was going to report on anything I did that my mother wouldn't approve of to her, and then I would be punished when I got back home. So I was never able to get away from God, if you will, to be myself out in the schoolyard or the neighborhood or the sidewalk. And so there was no way I was going to use God to support me to not drink. However, when you get crushed and something just happens, it's not like I have an explanation, it's not like I can describe or there's some scientific thing that happened. I realized in that moment I got dropped to the floor, a warm feeling came over me with sunshine, and I got up and went to an AA meeting. Looked up an AA meeting in the phone book and then went, and that meeting was an hour away. And that, I think, saved my life. And I don't know if it's a poem or a saying about footprints in the sand, where there talks about being carried, and that I just identify with that, because I think I got carried for quite a while, and support people were put, and all I had to do was just keep doing what I was doing, and just be aware of what was happening. So when somebody says to me, I can't handle a God thing, to me it's like, get over it, because, or there will come a time when you won't be saying that. You'll either be dead or you'll be in AA. And so my dad went to lots of church, $25,000 back when that was a lot of money back in the 1940s, you know, in Chicago. He died from drinking. He died when his son was a teenager. You know, drinking took him down. And yet he was in church, but he didn't have this God connection. And to me, I believe that that's the bottom line to all. Bottom line? Yeah, bottom line to addictions. And connection, that is. That he didn't have a connection to God, I didn't have a connection to anybody. And then when I found AA and God came and got me, it was like, okay.
Was that the moment in time then when you kind of transitioned into being able to hold onto your heart and being able to feel like you belong? It was AA that gave you that, and sobriety more so like your connection with...
I didn't actually feel like I belonged, but I did, but because that would be a definition of what I was feeling. It was more just a feeling of fullness. It was a feeling of warmth that I got when that sun came through the window when I was at my absolute, absolute lowest. And
Do you feel like you belong now, today?
obviously, there's part of me that doesn't. However, I have met some wonderful, wonderful people since coming across the border in 1992. Met some wonderful people in my sobriety down there. But those, I was opening up AA on Friday nights. I was in 12-step meetings, period, all the time. And one of the things that I think God also did for me was that in Reno, Nevada, they have an Alano club there that was financed by John Esquaga, who is an alcoholic and also owned in Sparks, Nevada, the Golden Nugget casino, so lots of money. And he used to have the AA meetings on the second floor of the casino. However, that didn't work for the gambling addicts, which was me, because I was going in there. I have to drift over to a table or something like that. So he built an Alano club, and the great thing about it was he built it because he believed in AA. He also built it because he had lots of shift workers. The Nugget's a big casino. So there were shift workers that were alcoholic that would get off at 4 o'clock in the morning that want to go to an AA meeting. And this Alano club had lots, it had a full kitchen, I mean, blah, blah, blah. And so I could go to 6, 8 meetings a day. And I basically lived in the Alano club rather than drinking or gambling or womanizing, because everything was there. This was in Reno, Reno, Nevada, it's everything. It was like God is saying, okay, Richard, I'm going to give you a little test. So he surrounded me with women and with alcohol and with the sound of gambling and money and et cetera, et cetera. And also 8 meetings, 6, 8 meetings a day at John Esquaga's, at the AA Alano Club. And I remember when I drove out of Reno, I looked in my rearview mirror. I was on Interstate 80 going east, and I looked in the rearview mirror and I saw Reno just drifting further and further and further away. And as it was drifting further and further away, I just was so grateful that I had spent a week there. And I was supposed to be there on business, but that all fell through. But everything was paid for, so I was there with nothing to do, surrounded by casinos, alcohol, other drugs, cocaine. You could go in the bathroom there, and it was like everybody in that hole, and big bathrooms, like 20 stalls, with doors. And when you go in, all you could hear is people doing that. And so if you're a drug addict, you know exactly what that means. And there I was. Can't do that either. Right? So those meetings and God, and lots of ice cream sundaes, lots of movies in the middle of the afternoon. And when I drove out, that was it. And yeah, that's a trip down memory lane for me as I'm sitting here.
What do you think the hardest part of getting sober was? What was the hardest part about it?
Believing that I couldn't exist without it. That just even the thought of not drinking. It was out of my realm of consciousness. There's just no way I could do it. And it was killing me, and I couldn't leave it alone. So I couldn't give it up, and I couldn't live with it. You know, we hear those things all the time in AA. And I also believe that for people that somehow graduate, that they don't need to go to AA. I can't tell you the number of people I've counseled across the years that think that they've graduated from AA, you know. And, well, no, you don't know, but that's been my experience. The other thing, when you're talking about your heart, I can say that up here, I can describe pretty well everything that went on, if given enough time, and, you know, but that's all that is. There's not a connection to that. That's a description of what happened for me. This, my heart, when you're saying hang on to your heart, is the experience itself. And when I drop down and I'm talking to my little boy, little Richard, by the way, you know, which I got lots of ribbing about, you know, when I was in inner child work. Your heart, without that, there's no connection. You know, you can get all the degrees, you can have all sorts of stuff up on the wall, but if you do not connect with your heart.
Is there something you could share to people that would be curious to how to connect? And like, how do you talk to little Richard, or how do you connect with your heart?
So, the founder of the inner child was a guy called John Bradshaw. And he introduced inner child in a book back in the 70s called Homecoming. And it was like, bring your inner child home to you. And when I discovered connection, if you will, not only to my inner child, to little Richard, but to God, to how I'm still connected to my ancestors. And even though I talk about my ancestors as being, you know, lots of doctors, lawyers, and whatever, with lots of stuff on the wall, when I look back at them through epigenetics and family constellation work, I really feel, for instance, my dad was a workaholic. I became a workaholic. In the 1970s, I crashed. I went into recovery on the beaches of Hawaii, and it was just, it wasn't satisfying anything. And 6 weeks after I was there, or after I had come back, all I thought about was work. And it was like, it had totally taken me over, because it was going to fill in all of those things that I saw all of those people when I was a little boy had achieved, and so work was going to do it. I was also doing my father's stuff, 9 to 9, Monday through Saturday, 9 to 9. So 6 days a week he was working 12 hours, and one day he was home and he was drunk. So that was his son's experience of his dad. He was gone. But he was successful. He was well thought of. So.
You're a father, and what was your experience then?
And I got lots of trophies. I was brought up on stage as an example for the corporations of this is what Richard Leisman does, you know, and everybody would do that, and I just suck it in, you know.
Well, you are impressive. You are.
So I'll tell you how impressive is. I believe that all alcoholics have shame talks with themselves. Oh God, how could I have done that? You know, oh boy. And I think they're necessary to never forget. I really do. I'd love to forget them, but I look back as this is something good. And one of the lows was when I was on the road. I was lecturing in high schools to senior classes about the future. What was it going to bring? And so and what the high schools would do is they would bring classes together to hear Richard's spiel, whatever it was. And so this guy said, well, I know it's last minute, but can you come at 7 rather than 8? Because I have this one particular class. Well, no, because that cut into my drinking. And so I said no, you know, and at 8 o'clock, I went in after having several drinks to do a lecture to this high school. And this guy was pissed.
He knew?
For me not doing the 7 o'clock class.
Yeah, yep.
So he says, he's introducing me, and he said, this is Richard Leisman, and he's here to talk to you about the future. And I asked him to come to talk to the science class at 7 this morning, but he was too drunk to come. He announced to the whole audience as I was standing next to him. And I just went, F. Like, what do you do with that? That's one of those
That's
you never
exploited.
forget. You never forget, you know. And passing out in different bathrooms and, you know, this whole litany of, you're out of control, Richard. You know, you're putting on this face, the whole thing's an act, but you're out of control when you get alcohol in you, you know, and you do embarrassing things, and on and on. You know.
But you found a way to get better. And when you talk about, you know, kind of having resemblances in this ancestral...
Day at a time.
Yeah.
Not, like I didn't go to a course. And the interesting thing was, I facilitated groups out at, it's not called, what it was called Top of the World. I don't know what it's called now, but out by Lackett Lake. And I did those groups for quite a while. And they were on Fridays. And sometimes I'd go in on Friday and they'd say, so-and-so left Wednesday, they OD'd Thursday. It's up to you whether you want to tell the group. And they were all close to these people because they just spent 30 or 60 days getting over fentanyl or whatever it was. And so I saw it 2 days after 60 or 90 days in treatment, they're dead, you know. And I went, so you can go to all the treatment in the world, and I'm not, well, I am kind of dunning it, but it does give people a break. But you know, AA, NA, those 12-step programs and those steps, it's a recipe on how to live your life. And basically I've been doing that. And I've also really, along the way, picked up good friends, good support. People are still reaching out to other people when I go to Wellbriety, to people that go to AA and Wellbriety, and they say so-and-so says hello, you know, those kind of things. And I still feel a connection to AA because it saved my ass. AA saved my life. And my connection to a higher power saved my life. Some of the shame, I definitely deserved it because I was out of control. I was doing crazy things, and you talk about hanging on to your heart. You gotta have something to hang on to. For me, I was hanging on to God. I was hanging on to praying. I was hanging on to the steps. I was hanging on to when's the next meeting start. Anything I could do.
You really ended up giving a lot back to the community and the people around you, I feel like, and all that from what I know about you, Richard. And maybe, like, you know, what, you know, getting sober sounds like it gave you enough to be able to to do that, right? That wouldn't be possible, obviously, if you were still drinking and carrying on and you haven't found the rooms and the recovery. And I guess, like, do you want to share a bit about the work that you've done and kind of maybe the meaning that, not even the work, but I think it's more the service. It's the service that you've given to the community.
Yeah, thanks. I was working for MCFD at the time in child protection, and I think this is a higher power story. And I was in the program, pretty well zooming along, hating the child protection work. Like, when I say it almost broke me, I think it probably did. And I was in Vancouver, and there was a guy working at Alcohol and Drug. His name was Paul Comer. I still respect him. And he said, Richard, they're interviewing over at Alcohol and Drug. And Paul knew I was in the program, and because I was going to NA, and AA is like every day. And so he said, you should apply. And I didn't. And so I was sitting in Vancouver because I was there to see a kid that I had a special school there. And I said, screw it, I'm going to apply. So I got on the phone and I called Alcohol and Drug, and they said, oh, sorry, Richard, the panel closed yesterday. That's it. So I just accepted, because what else are you going to do? And I got back to town, and I was just like kicking myself. And Paul called me and he said, they didn't hire anybody. So get a resume in. And so in the interview, this is making a short story long, in the interview, I felt that I was there under some false pretenses. And so I said, you know what? And it was Colin Mangan. He was the head of Youth Social Justice, or MCF, the legal part. There was the head of the hospital psych, can't remember his name, and the administrator. And so I said, I know this is important, but I got to tell you, I'm an alcoholic. And if you hire me, I cannot guarantee that I will not be drunk on the curb on Baker Street. And later on, I found that that's what got me hired, is when they said, this guy's got an understanding of the disease of alcoholism, because you can talk is cheap, But however, I think you recognize, and I do across the years, who's got program and who doesn't, who's hanging on and who's not, and why. And so there's a sort of an internal understanding of people in the program. And so that's one thing that got me going. And I remember she also said to me, Richard, we don't teach AA here at Alcohol and Drug. And I went, oh shit, well, they don't teach AA, what am I going to talk about? Because I got nothing else. I got the steps and whatever, and if I can't do that, when people come and sit down with me, what am I going to say? I've got nothing to say. And so I immediately started doing all these little programs, like solution-focused therapy. I've taken the advanced courses, the beginners courses, because then I would have that. I could talk about that as if I knew what I was talking about, and I didn't. But I got educated by the people that would come to see me. And I realized that if I would share my experience and my failures, that somehow or another they felt supported by that. Ooh, okay, now I had something to talk about. And it certainly wasn't tooting my horn. It was about what happened, where I was. And they would say something and I could identify with it, with their pain, with their struggle. And that type of connection, back to that word again, really I think led me, fed me So they fed me as much as what I was saying to them, like hook them into maybe a different way of being. And there's a YouTube thing about addiction is all about connection. It's not about drugs. It's not about alcohol. And what they talk about in there is connection. And it was proven. Do we have time? I'd just like to tell a quick story here. So the quick story that they talk about in this YouTube, it's actually a TED Talk, but I've seen it many times over and over again. And it's that in Vietnam, which was my war, that was my time, people may have trouble, identifying with what it was like in the United States. And I was in Chicago and blah, blah, blah. However, people got drafted. They just instituted the draft there again. Like they haven't voted it into Congress, but they're going to bring a draft back in the United States. And there was a draft, and I got drafted. And so, anyhow, this thing that the person in TED Talk talks about, he says these 17, 18, 19-year-old kids get plucked out of their neighborhoods, out of their bars, out of their softball team, out of their parents' bedroom, out of their girlfriends, all this sort of stuff. And they get picked up and they get flown 3,000 miles away and dropped into an environment that nobody's familiar with, the jungle. And all of the dangers of the jungle and the heat and the bugs and all of it. There's no connection. They've lost all their connections, all of them. And so for the people that are already there, for the rookie, he comes in and he sees they're smoking a lot of pot. So, but the pot they were smoking was Thai stick. And Thai stick has a tendency to get you anxious. And so the way that they would do in the war is, as a company, they would go out into the jungle at night and sit and wait for the enemy to come through the jungle. And you couldn't see, and I used to counsel some of these guys at alcohol and drug, and you couldn't see. So they were blinded. They were anxious from smoking weed before they went out. And some of their buddies, they would be dead the next morning, never having made a sound. Their throat was cut in the jungle. Because in the total blackness, there's 3 levels of shade in the jungle and the bugs and everything else. It was an impossibility to go out there. It was awful. It was awful. There's guys here in town that can tell stories. Similar to what I'm saying. This is secondhand, but it affected me.
Yeah.
And I'd hear them, and it was just like terrifying. And so, Thai stick doesn't work. We'll do heroin. So, turns out, at one time, there were 550,000 U.S. soldiers in Vietnam in a war against people who were living in Quonset huts, and bombing, carpet bombing from whatever. But they would still go out at night, and so there was lots of heroin because the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the China White came down the trail. So there was plenty of heroin to have. And heroin was the opposite. So they could go out, sit against a tree at night, and just get off on being loaded. And that was how they were going to get through the Vietnam War. So the U.S. government at that time, because the population, I was one of the protesters back in Chicago in 1968, and I'm protesting this war that these guys are living through. And they decided that they're going to end the war. They're going to bring these people back, these soldiers back. But they went, holy crap, there's about 300,000 heroin-addicted soldiers in Vietnam. what's the America? The military is going to get a black eye. What are we going to do? So they went, okay. They didn't have an answer to that, by the way. So they said, we'll bring 10,000 back, and we'll just see how that goes. So they brought 10,000, a lot of them were heroin addicts, back into their neighborhoods, back with their girlfriends, back into their bars, back on their softball teams, and everybody's expecting they're going to go through these terrible, terrible withdrawals from heroin, from the China White, and nothing happened. I mean, they might have got sick for a while, they might have paced around for a while, they might have thrown up for a while. I've done all of that. But nobody could understand it.
They found their connection.
Holy shit, what's happening? You know? Like, these guys are heroin addicts and they're not exhibiting anything. What are we going to say about heroin to anybody that watches this? We're not going to say anything about it. It's something that we just don't want people to know. But they brought them back, 10,000 at a time, and yeah, they had some, people that would struggle, but not fully like Hollywood would tell you. Man with the Golden Arm, Frank Sinatra's old movie, just didn't happen. But nobody understood it. But now, what they're thinking about addictions and connection, this is what that TED Talk was about. He was telling this story. That connection is heads and above over addiction. You get your connection, and there's a really good chance that you're not going to be trying to connect with something that's not good for you. So when I didn't have that connection as a youth, because my parents were either working or drunk, I went and found it. I found a connection in worry, in overworking, in overeating, in all sorts of stuff. People go, well, how could you get addicted? You don't have a connection? You will connect to something. And that's why the fear comes about leaving your addiction or your whatever your substance is.
Yeah.
Because it's like life and death. It's not like I just have to quit this. That's not it at all. No. It's like if I don't have this, I won't survive. I won't make it. I'll die. And so they keep on drinking. They resist, but they keep on drinking. And when I would send somebody off to treatment, some of them would, and this is after cutting them bus tickets and all funding, and they'd get off the bus in Castlegar and go check in and get drunk and never get the treatment. Because if they got the treatment and the substance was taken away from them, they'd die. So I can understand how they get off the bus, that is, and get off, period, on drinking.
Yeah.
So, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But I pray every day. I use the sobriety program for a God connection and connection to the earth. I use people like yourself. I mean, I won't go into names, but I have some really, really good friends that I've developed since coming to Canada. The other thing is Canada's been very good to me. Very good to me. Yeah. And like I started, I'm an old guy, and I don't need the San Francisco traffic and the workaholism and, all of this. And yeah, I'm just grateful. I'm just grateful.
What do you think you'd tell someone? I mean, you've said a lot today about, kind of what it's taken you to be able to find recovery and a new way of life. But what would you tell someone that was listening that was struggling today with a substance abuse issue? What would you say would be the next best step for them, or a little nugget?
Stop it. I mean, there's a cartoon, where the client walks into the therapist's office, and And he says, well, what do you got to say to me? Stop doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's it. That'll be $75. You know, right? Right? You know, just stop it. That's little. Actually, you know what? I think it's different. I think it's different for everybody. Yeah. I'd like to have it generic, you know, to whoever's going to watch this, is go do this and it'll be okay. But I don't have it. I don't have it. I can just talk about how I did it,
Yeah.
or how it's almost like I had some control over doing it. I didn't. I might even say that I intentionally did some things, but you know how people go to career planning? I don't think I know what that is. You know, I just took the path of least resistance because I was afraid of everything. Mm-hmm. If I wasn't as afraid over there, I went that way. You know, if I was more afraid over there, I stayed away from going over there. Mm-hmm. And
like you kind of referenced the moving target, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, how did I get to Cranbrook from San Francisco? You know.
We're glad to have you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
The community is. We're lucky to have you. And, you know, I know that you've helped a lot of people, Richard, and I know that, you know, it's a place of that true caring and connection. And it helps you, I think, just as much as the people that you help, right? And you've helped me in the past. I know that I've seen you a couple times for counseling. And, yeah, I mean, it was intense, right? And it was the work that I probably needed to do that I'm still scared to do ultimately, right?
Oh, for sure.
I ran away from you like a bat out of hell.
I watched.
Yeah. And actually I had a bat with you. I was beating up a red
I remember.
A bag and trying to get to the inner child work. And that's the kind of work that you do. It's really intensive, I feel like, and it is healing, right? And I can look at that and I can appreciate that. And you know, I mean, just I feel like what I know about your career, and I know that that's not what it's all about, and that's not where we belong, right? And that's, I feel like, you know, but I think it's the way that you've been able to give back to the community and the people here, right? And kind of make sense of maybe your own path and your own past, right? And so I really appreciate all that you have done. You've impacted me, friends, family of mine, like it's just the truth, right? So not that it's everything, but it's definitely something, and definitely a reason why I wanted you to just come and share little bits about yourself, because someone like yourself, like, I mean, it hasn't been easy, and there has been bumps along the way, right? And you're honest and you're real and you're raw, and I appreciate that about you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I am getting so much back from everyone that it's just kind of what is, if that makes any sense. It's like what's happening right now. Did I plan for this to happen? I absolutely did not. Did I think that somehow or another I could physically go on and have the same energy level and do the same things? Yeah, that was a pipe dream. You know? But as the COPD kind of takes my breathing and I'm out of balance on my legs and all these kind of things, there's a message in that too. There's a lesson in that. Mm-hmm. And if with something else I learned, if I just kind of step back and just kind of take it easy, and it's not take it easy, just stop working. Or an early message I got was surrender to win, was what they would say in AA early on. Mm-hmm. You know. And right now, I think what comes to me is surrender to win seems like, yeah, you know, been there, done that, knowing I was going to get crushed, right? You know, the message now that came to me is give up. Just give up. What do you got? What do you got to prove? You know? And like my friend Rebecca White, she's very fun. I'll be often talking about something I'm going to do, or go, or create, or whatever, and she gets this kind of officious, sort of motherly energy, and she'll go, and I can always tell when she's there. Like I have several friends that use the word, my name, Richard. They'll say, Richard, and Rebecca will say, you're 81. It's like, that's all the proof I need to do that. And I went, yeah, but I can still live in the past, right? Like, this is what I'm going to do.
Is it freeing to have that mind frame of just give up?
It's the truth.
Yeah.
And there's relief in the truth about living with what is, which I got from family constellations, and I'll use healing sentences that I got from family constellations. Father, bless me if I don't drink, and you always did. Out of loyalty to my dad, I don't have to model his drinking as a way of being. But I still want his love, and I still want his approval, and so part of me is going, well, that's what Dad did, if you want to be like Dad, I'll do that. But a therapist along the way just said, try this, and I said it. It was sacred, because I feel that he's still around. I feel he's here today. Every time I'm in an AA meeting and they say, we'll stand for a moment of silence for those that are still suffering, or those who have gone before us. And I always have a prayer for my dad and my mom at that moment. Wish you were here, kind of thing, right? And because maybe your life would have been different. Maybe my life would have been different. But they never made it, And they both died pretty quick, too. My mom died in 7 days once she went in the hospital, and my dad 2 days.
Holy smokes.
So they drank right to the end. They were strong holdouts. And so was I. So.
Do you think there was something that you wanted to share on here today, or did you have a thought about sharing something that you haven't been able to say that you'd like to?
If I had something that I'd like to say that I haven't been able to, I wouldn't say it. Because there's some reason that I haven't said it.
Yeah.
However, right now I don't have one of those that comes to my mind. Okay. And I got that from sobriety and from the program and from truthfulness, from good friends, from safety. And I've gotten a lot more from the people that I've worked with since coming here than I've ever given. And I am so grateful for the opportunity to meet people on a real level, on a real gut level, if you will, where they just, because that's where my healing was. Just, and I mean it, give up. Like, that sounds like, what?
I know, I'm having a reaction.
Well, it came to me in a prayer. I was praying, for some direction, for some information, for, what to do with being 81 and loving what you're doing, and people calling you for appointments and telling them no. How are you going to do that? So I was praying. And not long after that, the phone rang, and it was you that said, I've got some funding, I'm going to do this, And, would you consider that? And I remember I didn't bite right off the bat because I went, no, you don't want to do that. Even though I enjoyed your podcast. And then the thought came to me, why not? Maybe that's the answer to what should I do? Can I tell people I'm finished?
There it is.
And I want to keep some people, two or three people that I've worked with for 10 years or more, that we have very close and share sobriety and well-briety. And so I feel that prayer was answered. And I immediately got down to figuring out what I was going to say here. And I wrote this page, and then I flipped it over, and I wrote that page, and then I wrote this page. And then I went, I didn't bring it.
Just give up.
And it was like, that's not what I want to talk about up here. I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about all the gifts, all the blessings I got from the 12 steps. And to the people in AA. I have resisted sharing at roundups, where everybody gets together, and I've been asked a few times for that. And I resisted that just because. However, I was praying about that at my age in time. You got the funding and you called. So I'm here. Aww. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, I am so glad that you're here and that you came and shared a bit about yourself. And I know there's so much more in there, right? And it's a short amount of time to share such a big experience, right? But I feel like you did a really good job of just sharing the gift of desperation that you endured, and that ray of sunshine, the warmth of maybe finally belonging after, not knowing how to hold on to your heart because you didn't feel like you had one. And just this idea of giving back is kind of a way of being, but now being good enough to say you're giving up and that you're done and you need to transition into something different. That's what I hear anyway.
Yeah.
Richard. That's what I'm taking away.
And it's not that I didn't know I had a heart. It's that I didn't know whether there was any value in that. Whether, why would anybody do that? Any kind of emotion in this very German family of mine was weakness. And so, so I grew up in a German stiff upper lip. It was important to me to be a tough guy, but I was afraid all the time. And so anytime I would act tough, it was just an act. But inside, I was this scared little boy. And finally, I had to admit that I was a scared little boy. I was afraid of everything. And I can do that today. I'm afraid of virtually everything. However, higher power, and I don't know why I do that. Or maybe I should go higher power here in the room. So anyway, that's my story. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it, Richard.
Yeah. Honor to you.
And to you.
Morgan, honor to you too.
Hey, I'm Morgan. I'm the producer of the Hold On to Your Heart Project podcast. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. If you'd like to find out more about what we're all about and check out other episodes, you can find us at holdontoyourheartproject.com or on YouTube and Instagram at Hold On to Your Heart Project. Thanks for stopping by.